The law provides for significant monetary penalties if platforms don't conform to the law. Depending on the severity of the violation, fines could reach as high as 500,000 euros and could rise to 1 million euros if the offense reoccurs.
Wow.
Free Talk Live.
Chris, we're going to start out with another disturbing story that you brought in about Facebook and government and some sort of license to access Facebook in Austria?
Yeah, it's sort of as crazy as that. Yeah, it's ID, requiring ID, some sort of ID to be submitted to your social media companies in order to access social media.
Now, to some extent, Facebook has already implemented this. There was a time just sort of on their own volition.
Do you have a story of your own? Is that what you're going to talk about?
I have a story of someone I know.
Oh, okay, because I'd love to hear this too. Because somebody was thinking that you were actually kicked off Facebook for not supplying ID, but I didn't think that was correct.
That never happened to me.
Okay.
But there were some people who had changed their names on Facebook to like John Voluntarist. So they would
Freeman.
I don't know if any Freemans got caught up in it because it didn't catch me. But Voluntarist was a name that got on that list somehow of Facebook, targeting anyone with Voluntarist in their name and sending them a notice saying, we don't believe you're using your real name on Facebook, and we require that you use your real name, so you will need to show us a copy of your ID that has the name Voluntarist on it in order for us to keep your account in active status. And or you can change it to your real name, and I think they might have still required to show ID just to change it to whatever other name they wanted to change it to. So basically at that point, everybody with a questionable name, and it wasn't just Voluntarist,
a questionable sounding name, because just because it's if it doesn't. Yeah, anyway.
You could have been given that name by your parents.
Right, exactly.
Facebook didn't believe that you were, and they want you to show government ID to prove this. And this was a few years back, maybe even several years ago. It feels like it's been 4 or 5 years since I heard about this happening. So all I'm saying is here, it sounds like Facebook already had done this sort of on their own volition, or maybe it was the government who asked them to do it.
No, I haven't really read deeply into the story, so I don't know the details. But I think, from the sounds of it, it sounds like it's going to be for everybody who wants to use social media, presumably in Austria. So
let's hear it.
All right. So government seeks to eliminate internet anonymity with severe penalties.
And where's this from? I'm sorry.
This is from, let's see, I think it's Der Standard.
Is that a European?
I think this is
German?
Actually a translation of an article that was in Germany.
German, yeah. Der Standard sounds German.
Yeah. So users of online forums in Austria will have to provide operators with their true identities or risk fines that could run into the millions. Now, I do have to wonder, does that mean the operator
gets the fine
or
the user gets the fine? Yeah, it's not clear.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's the operator, because millions.
The average user can't pay $1 million or whatever.
Right, and the operator would have to, be the one to enforce it. So it's Those in Australia wishing to post content on the internet in the future will no longer be able to do so anonymously. According to the government's new draft law on diligence and responsibility on the web, users will have to provide their first name, last name, and address to platform operators. In the event of an investigation, operators would then have to supply that information to government agencies, or, in some cases, to private persons in cases of insult or defamation.
So basically anybody with a fake ID can get an account and make it look like somebody else was posting. They would be able to post as somebody else. If I had a copy of your identification, Vincent, I could just go ahead and sign up on one of these sites. And what's to stop me from doing that? What's to stop fake accounts from being created with identification?
Humorously, it says that you can actually still use a pseudonym. So it's not to tie names to addresses. It's so that police can go and arrest people they basically don't like. Or
who violates, all these online social media hate speech laws. That's probably it, because they have a lot of those in the EU and Germany and Austria.
Yeah, it doesn't affect all platforms. It affects any platform that has more than 100,000 registered users, or I guess earn more than 500,000 euros in annual revenues, or receives government press subsidies of more than 50,000 euros.
Well, if they're receiving a subsidy from the government, I can't say I feel bad for them.
Yeah, but 50,000 euros is really not that much.
No, it's not.
It's like no more than probably $70,000 US. So it's Yeah, I would not want to be taking money from the government if I had to, because it's probably going to take more than 50,000 euros to implement some sort of ID. I mean, every single person has to be ID. That's going to be expensive.
But this only applies to sites that have over 100,000 users, you said.
I don't know if it's all three of these are required. I think it's any one of them.
Okay.
See, according to the draft law, the platforms would also have to have a responsibility for determining if the ID information provided users is accurate. So, I mean, basically, they're definitely going to have you like scan your ID in or something to that effect, or have somebody, with the webcam, pull up your ID on the webcam and show a physical person, probably. I know that's what they're doing for like FinCEN related stuff in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's, across the board these days they're doing it that way, or if scanning an ID is still, acceptable solution. Maybe it depends, but how they choose to do so is left up to the platforms themselves. Though the annotation to the draft law mentions the use of dual-factor authentication. Wow. By way of so it sounds like they're going to have to use multiple means of identifying somebody. So not only would they require an ID, but they'll also require somebody to like verify their phone number. So they'll probably send like an SMS message, and then you'll have to with a code, and then you'll have to respond with like the verification in the SMS message to the provider. So they'll be able to tie you to both a license and a
phone number,
mm-hmm. or some other
Right. So if you don't have a phone number, you don't get to be on the internet.
Yeah, basically. Since the beginning of the year, all SIM cards in Australia have had to be registered with a photo ID. Oh, wow. They've already got some really insane requirements. Now, I've heard of this in Mexico, actually. And what's really funny is in Mexico, I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but there were a significant number of users, like I'm thinking thousands and thousands of users who registered as the president because they have to ID. So
where did they do this?
This was in Mexico.
I know, but on which site did they register as the president?
No. Phone. So basically, in order to get a SIM card in Mexico, you have to ID yourself to the person selling it to you.
Yeah,
and register your name with them and stuff. Well, apparently, it wasn't a very good system because thousands of people were registering as the president
of Mexico
like the day the law came into effect.
Wow.
So even though people were registering,
did the person at the phone store not know they were giving the name of the president?
I don't know. Who knows?
I mean, can you imagine the look you would get if you went into a phone store and tried to claim your name was Donald Trump as you tried to open an account?
The thing is, like, Mexico is so corrupt. It's not a Western style like democracy that holds corruption up as like this thing where we're going to throw you in jail for the rest of your life if you somehow accept bribes. Like, it's kind of the status. It's the
they're more open about accepting bribes and being corrupt than they are in the U.S. or Europe or any of these.
No, I don't necessarily.
The other countries are just as corrupt. And
its model of government is Western.
I don't know.
It's like a presidential.
I don't know that's true. I mean, if you look at Eastern countries, like, and you pass like some sort of security guy, like, you have to bribe him if you want to continue. I have never seen anything like that in the U.S. And it's the same thing. Like,
we're talking about politicians. That's who I was talking about.
Okay, well, I'm talking about just corruption in general, not necessarily politicians.
I'd rather give a cop a $20 bill than have to go to court.
Sure.
To me, this system's just as corrupt. There's just a sort of patina of legitimacy on it. More coming up here. Free Talk Live. So, Chris from thinkpenguin.com, you've been sharing with us this story about Austria. There have been a lot of bad news out of Australia, but this is Austria.
Right. And
mandating identification.
The person who I actually got this story from thought it was Australia. Because just like, I was like, last week they passed a law, something, I'm trying to think what the law said was specifically, but it was Australia had this crazy law that they passed in reaction to the shooting in New Zealand. So, it's unfortunately, they're using these terrible like shootings and things as an excuse to pass all these laws, and I think that's kind of where this also is coming from. So the law provides for significant monetary penalties if platforms don't conform to the law. Depending on the severity of the violation, fines could reach as high as 500,000 euros and could rise to 1 million euros if the offense reoccurs.
Wow.
The Australian Communications Authority, more commonly known as Austria,
that's the FCC over there, right?
Would be responsible for enforcement of the law, which also applies to forums such as those operated by Standard. I don't know what that means. E-commerce platforms are exempt, however, as are platforms.
Standard is the name of the website.
Is it?
Remember, it was like Standard something or other.
I got you. Yes, you're right.
German
you're right.
website. So they're saying this would apply to their forums.
Yep. Let's see here. E-commerce platforms are exempt as are now. This gets really hilarious. Not yet. But as platforms that earn no revenue, well, they all earn revenue because some sort of money has to cover the costs of the servers, either from their content or from advertising. Look, you can't operate a site if you don't have the funds of any size anyway, if you don't have the funds coming in order to operate the site.
Yeah, but is it, I mean, look, I'm not a tax expert or anything like that, but is it revenue if you're just subsidizing a thing? That thing doesn't necessarily have revenue. Like the web server that I pay for, the server that hosts freetalklive.com also hosts a dozen other websites.
That's true, but they say no revenue, and it kind of makes it sound like
most of my websites have no revenue.
Yeah, but we're not
talking.
We're not talking about platforms like that. We're talking about platforms that are
a
little bit.
System.
I mean, like there's actually users and
there's employees.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to get money to pay.
Yeah,
there's
going to be some level of revenue. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to continue to operate. I don't think. So this is where it gets kind of humorous. So the whole reason for this law is like right wing nut jobs like shooting up schools and mosques and things like that. So this is why this is sort of funny. And I'm not saying that the mosques getting shut up are funny, just that this does not apply to them, it turns out. So right-wing sites exempted. Yeah, you heard that.
How's that?
The exemption, however, also extends to sites that have often been criticized in the past for allowing hate posts to remain online, such as the platform Unzensurriert.at, which is linked to the Freedom Party of Austria, the right-wing populist party that is the OVP's junior coalition partner in the current government.
So that's a bunch of political talk from that country that I don't understand.
I don't totally understand it either, but basically what they're saying, it sounds like, is that government is exempt, and the government,
or the political parties are
apparently right-wing. That's my interpretation of it, something to that effect. Yeah. So basically, if you're some sort of political party, you're exempt.
If you're in the party, you're okay.
Yeah, that just seems like so ridiculous. So basically, if somebody wants to go and set up a right-wing political party, right, in order to have a forum or something like that, they would be exempt from the law. Let's see here. Blumel justified the exemption by saying it was designed to reduce the potential burden on smaller platforms and startups that likely would be unable to afford compliance. How does that have anything to do with smaller platforms? Because that's not what they were saying here or above. They're just talking about like right-wing platform.
Either way, this is not good news.
No, this is terrible news
for people in Austria. And of course, our listeners out there might be saying to themselves, well, I'm not in Austria, so who cares?
Well, the problem is that this is not just really, this is not happening in just Austria. These laws are being passed all over the world. And we should be concerned because even though it may not be here in the United States, it's not like they're not attempting to. We already know they're attempting to pass similar types of laws in the United States.
Well, and also,
so we should be concerned and we should be, up in arms against this kind of stuff, regardless of where it happens.
And also, a lot of the times politicians would point to Europe as an example. They say, like in New Hampshire, they point to Vermont or Massachusetts, something status that they're doing that they want to do in New Hampshire.
Right.
People, federal, nationally say, oh, well, Europe is doing this. Why can't we be more like you have that Scandinavian socialism? So the more countries outside the U.S. adopt it, the more of a case, I guess, the people of a globalist or internationalist in the U.S. would have to say, we need this too. We need to keep up with the rest of the world in tyranny.
Yeah, get this. They're saying the same principles that apply to the real world must also apply to the digital world. I mean, that just sounds so ridiculous. Let's see here.
Well, to some people, that sounds reasonable. To some people, it's like, well, of course we would want the same principles to apply. We don't want this internet to be anonymous.
Do you demand ID when somebody goes to some sort of public forum and or a protest or something like that, or where you gather? I mean, do they ask for ID when you enter a bar?
They have facial recognition cameras on cop cars, so
okay, for
they don't need to.
They're asking for ID, but not for identification. They're asking for it to make sure you're over a certain age.
That's the claim.
I mean, yeah, I disagree with that as well, but it just seems ridiculous that you should be. I mean, even there, I think it's ridiculous, even for age purposes.
Do we have people out there in our audience that support the idea of having to show identification to get on a website on the internet to converse with others, to get on a forum, on a comments section, for instance.
Free Talk Live. Listen live 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern or grab the podcast. It's all at freetalklive.com.